So the beginning of the offensive towards the Cambodian border has begun. About 10 miles ahead, you can hear the shots of the mortars they're firing are the North Vietnamese Army and the Allied Viet Cong. The communists began firing back at the tanks and armored personnel carriers 100 yards up the road. Information on the political maneuverings of Washington, Hanoi and Saigon will not have trickled to them this far. This is the first time we've been up Highway 13. That was an airstrike.
What is it to you?
I enjoy it.
Peace is within reach in a matter of weeks.
This is the biggest retreat by the South Vietnamese Army in the entire war. Things have never looked more depressing. Can I ask you how seriously you're taking this current communist offensive here?
Transmission, take care of that.
Well, I intend to kill them all.
Is it a major offensive in
Oh,
this area?
yes, major offensive. Yes, a 5th Division and the 9th Division.
How many men involved against you?
Well, we had, to begin with, we had the 5th Division, that's 3 regiments. And those regiments about 1,500 each. We had 3 regiments of the 5th Division at Loc Ninh, and then the 9th Division decided they wanted to take province headquarters at An Loc.
In military terms, is it just a diversionary move to keep troops down in the south while they maintain their attack in the north?
Well, I don't know. You gentlemen have been in business a long time. I always thought Saigon was the target.
It's evident that when the communists first planned this offensive, they didn't expect so many South Vietnamese to be massed against them so quickly. They came into the country this far south as a gesture, to show they can still come and go as they choose and destroy what they like when they decide to. But unless the North Vietnamese move out of those towns ahead within the next 24 hours, they may well find that the road back to their Cambodian base is now closed. It seems for the first time in this war that the South Vietnamese are now calling the tune. And the military commanders here are seeing this just not as a counter-offensive, but as a time to see for the first time, one way or the other, whether the South Vietnamese, without the aid of the Americans on the ground, can compete with the North Vietnamese on their own terms. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, South Vietnam. So the beginning of the offensive towards the Cambodian border has begun. About 10 miles ahead, you can hear the shots of the mortars they're firing are the North Vietnamese army and the Allied Viet Cong. All night they were mortaring this artillery base here, which is about 4 miles the other side of Trang Dang. It stopped. Fighter planes have been bombing the area. A helicopter came over a minute ago to report that the area seemed to be cleared of Viet Cong and MVA. In a few minutes' time, these armored personnel carriers and the tanks and infantry following will move ahead up this road towards An Loc, a town which has been now under siege by the communists for the past 6 days. Once they've taken An Loc, the road the other side has been cut off. The communists who came themselves to ambush the South Vietnamese army will themselves be ambushed. The road back to their Cambodian base has been finally cut off. What was happening last night here?
Last night, at this particular spot, there wasn't anything going on. I served as a relay for two positions. 5th Battalion, again, was having contact all night long.
What's the purpose, you think, of keeping you here? I mean, they're about, what, 5 miles ahead of you? What's the point of holding you down here? There can't be many left up there.
Well, the purpose of holding us down, I guess, is to delay us as long as possible.
But to bring more people in?
I don't think it's for them to bring more people in. I think it's to cover moving out.
Within the next 24 hours, we should know whether this counter-offensive has worked, whether the South Vietnamese have been successful in taking An Loc, and whether they've been successful in pushing the North Vietnamese ahead of them. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, on Highway 13, South Vietnam. Thursday the 13th, and until this morning things looked fine. All day yesterday the South Vietnamese had been moving steadily forward up Highway 13 towards the besieged capital of An Loc. Still more troops filtering up from the south, offloading and then fanning into the bush each side of the road. As they moved up, new artillery positions were established immediately behind them. Their shells were being aimed less than 2 miles away, right into the middle of the North Vietnamese emplacements. But at midday, the communists began firing back at the tanks and armored personnel carriers 100 yards up the road. For 2 hours, the tanks kept their ground, sometimes moving in the grass to confuse the men inside the forest who were aiming B-40 rockets at them. On the other side of the road, one of the tanks took a direct hit and caught fire immediately. But the crossfire was too fierce for anyone to move across the open space to try and help the 2 men trapped inside. A half an hour later, when there was a lull in the fighting, it was completely destroyed. In 3 hours of fighting, the South Vietnamese lost 4 tanks and towed back to base another 4, their tracks blown away by the B-40 rockets. Casualties were high today. The dead have not been counted. No one has yet gone forward to bring the bodies back to base. But over 50 men have been wounded, and soldiers carried them back as best they could. On the back of one of the damaged tanks they brought back to base was a captured North Vietnamese soldier, badly wounded in the face and arms. His unit, he said, had been badly hit, their supply line had been cut, they had no food or water, and very little ammunition left. In the strange way of the war, he was flown out on the same medical evacuation helicopter that came to pick up the South Vietnamese dead and wounded. All were flown back to the emergency field hospital at Lai Khe, south down Highway 13. As the fighting stopped for a while, more troops moved across the bush into the forest to flank the tanks left back on the road. The brigade major moves into positions looking away and slightly behind. A favorite communist tactic is to move around behind the army during these lulls. And, as always, behind the South Vietnamese field commander, an American officer listens in discreetly, advising when he thinks necessary. Michael Nicholson, ITN, on Highway 13, South Vietnam.
Anh gọi Đông Hồ nhận được chưa?
Cho biết Đông Kiều ở đâu rồi cho biết đi.
Tôi đang ở cái chỗ mà mấy cái con cua của bạn bò rồi tới rồi đứng lại rồi trở lại.
Right, I got you, Lima Charlie. Are you on your way up now? Okay, good copy. We're deployed out right now and awaiting further instructions. Good copy.
The North Vietnamese up the road seem determined to stay here, despite the fact that each side of them on this Route 13 are 2 divisions of South Vietnamese troops. We thought yesterday morning, according to the optimistic reports from American advisors here, that by this evening we would be in An Loc, the provincial capital, 15 miles up the road. But we're still here, and there's no immediate prospect of moving much further forward. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Highway 13, South Vietnam.
nước ở đó. Cái bắc của nó khoảng chừng 1,5 cây trả lời. Đâu cứ tiến lại lẻ đi đằng trước đó.
Rồi.
What is happening here over the past few days makes it the most crucial war zone throughout South Vietnam. The rapid advance made by the South Vietnamese on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday has been abruptly halted by a battalion of North Vietnamese troops about a mile and a half up the road. The South Vietnamese, despite the heavy artillery they've been using, despite their tanks and despite the support from the air, have no prospect of moving any further forward while those North Vietnamese remain where they are. We sit in a ditch on Highway 13 with the infantry, waiting for the next move to be made. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, South Vietnam. Despite the irregular movement of troops and ammunition up and down Highway 13 in the past few days, we have been told by the South Vietnamese commanders and by their American military advisors that the situation is now stable. We take that to mean that Saigon is no longer threatened by an imminent communist invasion, and that the Army Chiefs of Staff are no longer anxious about decisions they've made to relieve the siege of An Loc. How many MVA do you think are up there at the moment?
Well, we think there's still elements of 2 regiments around An Loc itself.
And how soon do you think it will be before we can start moving forward towards that capital?
Who's we?
Well, the South Vietnamese.
they're moving towards that capital right now with a whole brigade. Now, if you're talking about up Route 13, I can't give you an answer on that. It's going to be a little while. The enemy has got forces south of An Loc, along Highway 13. 21st Division's out there fighting them and finding them and mixing it up with them.
All this weekend, paratroopers have been standing by to be airlifted out of the base at Lai Khe, 25 miles north of Saigon, to An Loc and its perimeter. Because of intensive communist ack-ack fire along the route, many helicopters have had to turn back, and these troops have had to sit and wait on the edge of the helicopter pad, waiting for the OK. As they sat or slept under the trees, medical evacuation helicopters returned from the fighting, and the men who were waiting to go to war watched as the dead returned from it. That afternoon, 4 Viet Cong rockets hit one of the ammunition dumps on the base, and for more than 6 hours, hundreds of tons of high explosive cut off one half of the base from the other. The explosions hastened one decision that the paratroopers waiting to go to An Loc should leave at once, and in one afternoon more than 1,500 men were airlifted into the fighting areas around the provincial capital. We flew in one helicopter over An Loc, and because of the ack-ack fire we kept above 2,000 feet. But even from that height we could see the smoke rising from the houses which had been damaged either by South Vietnamese dive bombers or by ground fighting. As we flew over the town, a South Vietnamese spotter plane was photographing the day's damage. And over the northern part of it, a Cobra helicopter and a Sky Raider dive bomber began their first run-ins before they began their attacks on communist-held positions. Despite some reports, there has been no retreat by the South Vietnamese along Highway 13. But for the past few days there has been a lull in the fighting along this road, and the soldiers took full advantage of it. The communists have moved no further south this past week, and the road through to Saigon is effectively closed to them. Much depends on its staying that way. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, South Vietnam. In this one cemetery alone in Saigon, more than 65 coffins were awaiting burial on the morning we filmed there. The South Vietnamese casualties in this war are much, much higher than the American casualties of 1968 and 69. Higher because they are fighting a less sophisticated war without the all-embracing air cover the American troops demanded. The defense of Highway 13, probably the most famous road in South Vietnam now, has taken many lives. A small but crucial highway, it is the one that brings supplies from the docks in Saigon to the troops up front. It is the one the communists would have to control if they were to try and take Saigon. Locally recruited militia, called Popular Forces, are stationed in and around villages which border the road, protecting, we are told, the people from attack or intimidation by the Viet Cong. Because so many of the young men are now in the army, the recruits are usually old men or young girls. They are given a week's training in firearms, a black uniform, and then they're on their own. The South Vietnamese attempts to clear Highway 13 are often indiscriminate. Their artillery destroyed part of a village just south of the base at Lai Khe. It was a mistake. Their map coordinates were wrong. But 8 people died, including a family of 5, and 20 more people were injured. In the past few days, a handful of communist snipers have been successful in keeping Highway 13 closed more often than it's opened. This queue of lorries, cars and coaches have been waiting to get through to Chon Tan for the past 30 hours. Further on, about another 2 miles, we were caught in a sniper ambush, despite being part of a large army convoy on its way with supplies to Chon Tan. We watched as the local commander called an artillery fire. And after that had cleared some of the forest, he called in phantom jets piloted by Americans, who began low-level bombing runs, dropping napalm. Then the infantry went into the forest to count the VC dead. They found none. Somehow they had escaped it all and had retreated deeper into the jungle without waiting too long for the South Vietnamese troops to make contact on any scale. But the South Vietnamese again took casualties, hit by an enemy they seldom ever see, in an area supposedly under South Vietnamese control. Maybe tonight, or maybe tomorrow morning, that same communist company will attack again somewhere, up or down this Highway 13. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, South Vietnam. South Vietnamese soldiers, wounded higher up on Highway 14, and this mother and her children have been brought into Kon Tum by an American transport helicopter to wait for another lift going further south to Pleiku, or maybe Saigon if they're lucky. But these people, in the refugee camps in Kon Tum, can expect to stay huddled in the corner of a playing field until the war in these Central Highlands is decided one way or the other. The very worst that can happen to them is that Kon Tum will become another An Loc, with both sides battling over who shall control it. And there's no reason to doubt that if that happens, Kon Tum will suffer like An Loc. Thousands of dead and wounded, and the town completely destroyed. On the roads leading out of Kon Tum, many of the townspeople have already begun their trek southwards, towards Pleiku. It's 40 miles, and some will make it, but delayed by airstrikes, landmines, and Viet Cong snipers. But like the mother with her children in the helicopter, they reckon they have no choice. Daily, Kon Tum looks more and more deserted. Cattle left by their owners stop and eat whatever food they can find. And the only regular customers at the few stalls left in the marketplace are the soldiers. You're right. Tanks guard all entrances to the town, but the North Vietnamese also have tanks, and we've seen that in the past few weeks they can use them to more effect. The communists are going for the center of South Vietnam, and Kon Tum is its waist. Let them take this province, and the country will effectively be cut into two. Communist strategy seems to be that if they can effectively cut the north from the south, they can saturate the Central Highlands with troops at the moment waiting on the Cambodian border. If they can do that, then they can in their own time start moving up and down South Vietnam. More than one observer has said in the last few days that this present communist offensive can be won or lost in the Central Highlands, which makes the battle for Kon Tum very crucial indeed. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Kon Tum, South Vietnam.
2 days ago, this road to Quan Tri was open. Yesterday it could be used with caution, but today the communists have blown a bridge 3 miles on. There are snipers all along the route, and it is closed to everyone except the refugees. Vietnamese convoys with supplies for troops cut off in Quan Tri wait by the side of the road a safe distance from the snipers. The vehicles began moving forward, but they didn't move far. Already some of the lorries have turned back to way. The soldiers follow, carrying with them the wounded who've been hit by the first snipers earlier this morning. The wounded are evacuated whenever a suitable vehicle passes. Sometimes it's a bus, or an ox cart, or an ammunition truck. Sometimes the wounded just die waiting. A small unit of rangers is left behind. A few stay on the bridge where the road crosses the river at Phong Dien, though it's more likely that if the bridge is blown up, it'll be by the South Vietnamese trying to stop communist tanks from crossing. Already, South Vietnamese tanks have been brought back from the hills to the road as the first line of defense, which, in all the fights in the past few weeks, they have shown themselves not to be. On the road behind them, I spoke to the American advisor in the area, Major Robin Sheridan.
Basically what's happened here, as far as we can tell from our small area here, is that when the refugees were moving south is the time that the NVA decided they would throw their 130 guns on the highway, and just about 1,000 meters north of us they were just blowing away the women and kids all day. They've moved very close to QL1 with their probably company-sized units, which have temporarily, I would say, closed US1 until we can get enough assets in there to clear them out. We've been running airstrikes all day and firing the naval guns in there, but we've got to get the road open to Quang Tri. That's basically what we're supposed to be doing.
So Quang Tri is effectively under a state of siege now?
I would think so. I would think so right now. If you can't get into it, I would say so. We can still get the helicopters in there, but by road, no.
The surest sign that the communists are spreading their forces out across the countryside is to see the sprawl of refugees leaving it. They are not all from Quang Tri. They've moved out of their villages on each side of Highway 1 as the communist units have moved in. They all want to get to Hue, and they fight each other for a place on any transport going there. And they fight with soldiers who've thrown away their helmets and rifles and who are trying to smuggle themselves away from the fighting. If they're caught, they know they'll be shot. But today that didn't seem to worry them as they ran for the lorries.
I got
No one here can remember such a flood of refugees south since the last communist offensive during Tet in 1968. The alarming thing is that thousands of South Vietnamese troops have joined them. Alarming because only a few small fire bases are now left between the approaching communist forces and the city of Hue. With him was an American advisor who was coordinating air attacks and fire from American destroyers who were off the coast 6 miles away. On the right of us, the road from Quang Tri was littered with what was left of a South Vietnamese convoy. Lorries were still smouldering, ambulances, with the dead still inside them, wrecked by B-40 rockets.
So the story is being repeated up here in the north, except that for Highway 13, we read now Highway 1, and except for An Loc, we now read Quang Tri. The South Vietnamese, despite their overwhelming power in the air, despite their artillery and strength on the ground, are now retreating back towards Hue, which is what the communists are after. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, on the road to Quang Tri, South Vietnam.
Why should this have happened? There was a division of South Vietnamese up there, division and more.
Okay, they've got 10,000 troops, and the bad guys have got 40,000 troops. We've got the U.S. Air and everything else, but they punch through. You can't take that away from them. And,
Are they going to punch through to Way?
I don't think they'll take away. I'm still convinced they won't take away.
Not an orderly retreat. Men walking along the road to where they can get transport, to jump on board and try and go south to safety to the city of Way. A whole division of men and more getting out of it. This is the biggest retreat by the South Vietnamese army in the entire war. Things have never looked more depressing. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, with the retreating South Vietnamese army, South Vietnam.
How have the Marines fought on this section?
Very well. They've kept their tactical integrity, they've kept their weapons, they've kept their morale, the elan and esprit of the unit is outstanding. They've done exceptionally well against numerically superior forces, and they've been fighting the rear guard action here, playing Horatio at the bridge for almost 2 weeks now.
As the Major says, the Marines have held the bridge, just like Horatio, but they've only managed to do it by blowing it up. And just down the road here at Dong Tien, the plastic explosive here on this bridge shows that this one is ready to go too. Richard Lindley, News at 10, Highway 1, South Vietnam. Let's get the equipment out. Hurry up. Come on. Get our stuff out. Take the magazine case. Got my film out?
Yeah, around the other side.
Right, is that everything? Let's go. Let's get out.
There were 2 water.
Okay, quick. Right, let's get away. Come on, quick.
That location, over. They're on the road, and they extend about 500 meters to the west. Okay, as soon as you get you can see the arty smoke coming up now here.
This is as far up Highway 13 that the South Vietnamese Army have managed to get for the past 2 weeks. The American advisor here a few minutes ago said that the North Vietnamese had every kind of weapon at their disposal, including missiles. A few moments ago, our car was shot at with a B-40 rocket. And these artillery strikes are meant to try and clear the roads that we can move just that little further forward.
We've been fired at by a 57 recoilless rifle. We've also been held up by infantry and heavy weapons within 100, 200 meters to our front. And we've got a real good mark on that recoilless rifle, and we put artillery and the bombs to knock it out.
Is that the thing that hit our car when we arrived?
That's exactly what hit your car when you arrived.
And the airstrikes, are they after the same target?
They're right on the target. They're right on the target. Those big bombs are hitting right on.
A few minutes ago, as an aircraft went over, we heard fire on the left. Was that fire at the aircraft or your own fire?
No, that was 51 cal. There it goes right there. You heard it right there. That's firing at that jet. It's firing right now. Firing right now. There it goes again.
I mean, we seem to be surrounded on the flank and ahead of us here.
That's correct.
Any chance of moving forward?
That's the whole purpose of being here today. This element right here does not have the mission of moving forward. It has the mission of giving the impression that we're doing what we've done the last week. We have a battalion off to your west, and we have 2 battalions with armored personnel carriers going around to your east.
No problem about getting back there, I hope.
No, I would say not, but we do have VC companies or NVA companies within about to our rear and off to the west, but they should not interfere with you going back on the road.
You're right. This is the first time we've been up Highway 13. That was an airstrike. First time we've been up on this road for the last week. The South Vietnamese have moved no further forward, but it's some comfort at least to see that they've moved no further back. Michael Nicholson, News at 10 on Highway 13, South Vietnam.
In Hue itself, panic has subsided. Some refugees have returned. There's a kind of normality about the city in which the poor just go on living as best they can, while the rich remain in the relative safety of Da Nang or Saigon. The skeleton of city administration is functioning. In the citadel, the stocks of war supplies grow with every day that passes. These newly reconditioned tanks, to replace those destroyed or abandoned at Quang Tri, still have their unopened boxes of equipment on them. Ammunition is stacked high within the ancient fortress. ARVN soldiers relax in the gatehouse to the citadel, even sling their hammocks from the ceremonial imperial cannon where it said Ho Chi Minh and General Giap used to take an afternoon nap when they studied here in Hue. On the battlements, soldiers are constantly at their posts. It's generally agreed that the fall of Hue would be another Dien Bien Phu, the battle that forced the French to give up the fight here. Defeat would mean the loss of all the North, and would make it very difficult for President Thieu to survive. For that reason, a communist victory here would be a glittering prize for them, one they seem prepared to wait for until they feel they have the strength to take it.
thì mà nó không có cái cơ duyên là nó phiền lắm. Cơ duyên là đối với nó cũng là cả một vấn đề. Nó cái sao vậy? Dạ có bệnh rồi. Dạ có bệnh rồi mà không phải sợ.
Saw a Russian-built T-54 tank go into a church where people were having services, and the tank started firing with its main gun. When it ran out of ammunition, started firing with its machine guns on the tank until everyone in the church was dead, sir.
How many people were in the church?
A good 100, sir. I can't say, I'd say there was 100 people in the church.
Now, you've lived for 53 days in An Loc in pretty appalling conditions. Now, there have been some reports of incredible numbers of artillery rounds and rockets coming in. Are they exaggerated or not?
No, sir. I'd like to go back to the night of May the 10th, sir, and it's been estimated we took 7,800 rounds of different caliber indirect fire weapons. That's a good number, sir. We took at least that many. The prep lasted for approximately 10 hours, sir. It started at 1800 in the afternoon, and it lasted till 0400 in the morning. The first 6 hours of the attack was artillery, 105 and 155. Then the mortar started in. I wouldn't even want to guess how many mortar tubes were around, but it was just so intense that it's unbelievable, sir.
Officially, theirs is a combat support role, but as the Shark's teeth markings on their Cobra helicopters suggest, they see themselves as hunter-killers. From their base at Phu Bai near Hue, the pilots of F Troop 4th Air Cavalry fly further north than any other American helicopter unit to search out and destroy what, in their laconic way, they call simply the bad guys. And the bad guys shoot back. 5 rounds of anti-aircraft fire have hit this Cobra, or Snake as the pilots call them. One shell has exploded inside the tail section, damaging the transmission system. It could easily have put the tail rotor out of action, leaving the helicopter to revolve helplessly beneath its own main rotor till it crashed out of control. Relief at returning safely from a mission shows itself in a sort of boastful hilarity, accounts of what they did to the North Vietnamese and the near misses they've had themselves. They don't have much time to talk.
Especially when I'm watching those black puffs come up and I look over and just change.
The ground crews are already rearming the helicopters with missiles and ammunition belts. Cavalrymen have always walked with a certain swagger. Every pilot keeps his black Stetson, $20 apiece, straight from America, under his seat and puts it on for the walk over to the operations room where he'll be briefed on his next mission. While most American units are now thinking primarily of when they'll be sent home and of how to avoid being killed in the interim, F Troop prides itself on being fully involved in the war. The pilots are in real danger every time they fly, and that may be 7 hours a day. Since the troop arrived here on April the 1st, 8 crews have been shot down, though all but 2 of them have been rescued. When they're briefly on the ground, the game the pilots play is risk. The counters on the board are armies, and the aim of each player, military victory and world domination. The winner of this game, Captain An Loc. As leader of the Loc helicopters, the little birds that fly ahead of the Cobras looking for trouble, he takes perhaps more risks than the other pilots. So many of the American units now working in this war, B-52 pilots, for example, or the fleet at sea, operate a long way from their target. Perhaps they never see it except by radar or something like that, or because a spotter tells them it's there. You're right in on the ground. How does it feel to sort of tackle the enemy at close quarters like that?
It's exciting. It's something that you've trained to do for an extended period of time. And you find that when you do it, initially going out on a mission, of course, you feel the same fear that anybody else feels when they realize that you might go out and get hit.
It's sometimes said that your unit is the only one that's still enjoying this war.
I wouldn't say enjoying it, I'll say perhaps participating. Some people enjoy it, some don't. Some just go out and do it as a job. It's a daily grind.
What is it to you?
I enjoy it.
Skimming over the paddy fields and sand dunes, the Loc pilots show what low-level flying really means. This time the mission is to the north in the My Chan area, where the South Vietnamese Marines are trying to repel any North Vietnamese advance. Wheeling and turning, literally hedge-hopping, the two Loches scan the ground for signs of the enemy, tank tracks, bunkers or trails. The Cobras, with their superior firepower, follow. The command ship in which we are travelling holds itself ready to swoop in and retrieve any crew shot down. A little further north and the enemy reveals itself. Innocent-looking puffs of smoke in the sky mean anti-aircraft fire. They've drawn fire from a little village about 2.5 miles in from the seashore and just into Quang Tri province across the My Chan River. The Loches have drawn the fire and now the Cobras are going in. But it seems that the North Vietnamese have got a 37mm anti-aircraft gun, firing airbursts, shrapnel exploding in the air, extremely dangerous with these very vulnerable helicopters. On the ground, it's the noise of exploding artillery and mortar rounds, the shattering din of small arms fire that means danger. Up here, where the noise of the rotors drowns almost everything else out, it's the sharp pitch of the pilots' voices on the radio that tells you you're in action. The only weapon we really hear is our own .50 caliber machine gun, which joins in the fight. The North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun has apparently been silenced. Now the Cobras fire flechette rockets at what look like camouflaged troop positions. The red smoke marks the moment when the rocket releases its steel darts, which stabilize in the air as they fly towards the target. Out at sea, just off the coast, the 7th Fleet fires 150 rounds into the target the air cavalry has identified. Their armament expended, the helicopters head back to refuel and rearm.
Richard Lindley, news at 10, South Vietnam.
This morning, the refugees were pouring south from Dak To and Hoi Mok. There were thousands of them. They came by ox cart, by bicycle, by scooter, but the vast majority came on foot. Ironically, most of the devastation to this village occurred when the South Vietnamese Rangers and infantry reoccupied the town. As usual, the target area was softened up for hours with artillery fire first, and as a result, hardly a single house has escaped. The South Vietnamese are almost extravagant in the use of artillery. This morning they were using a barrage while a company moved up a road simply to clear a few snipers. This morning some refugees were allowed back in to salvage what they could from the smouldering ruins of their homes. There wasn't a great deal left. There were a few pigs who'd run squealing into the jungle, some pots and pans. In terms of the overall situation in South Vietnam, in terms of comparison with Kon Tum and An Loc, Phuoc Hoa Long is a sideshow. The Viet Cong have been a minor threat ever since the Tet Offensive back in 1968. But to the people who live here, the past fortnight has brought death and destruction. Christopher Wayne, News at 10, Dak To Province, South Vietnam. As the Sky Raiders moved in, we could see that their bombs were falling very close indeed to the South Vietnamese positions. And after 2 runs, it became obvious that the Sky Raiders had picked the wrong target and were bombing their own positions. In the distance, we could see South Vietnamese troops frantically scrambling across the highway for safety. As we watched, they gestured to a group of civilians to join them. It was then that the Sky Raider made the 3rd run. It had dropped 4 canisters of napalm on those civilians and troops. After a few moments, a group of we pressmen who'd been watching moved cautiously down the road into the smoke. The sights which greeted us were awful. Almost the first person we saw was a little girl aged about 9 running up the road. She hadn't got any clothes on. She'd presumably torn them off when they caught fire. There's not a great deal that you can do for someone suffering from a napalm burn. But I was told once by a surgeon that one thing you can do is to try to lower the surface temperature of the burn by pouring on water. So we emptied our water bottles on the go. Other children, and other civilians for that matter, hadn't been so lucky.
The ritual of the official peace talks on Vietnam was reenacted in Paris again today for the umpteenth time. No progress was made, not that anyone expected any. If any progress has been made during Dr. Kissinger's 5 days visit to Paris, it was round another table in highly secret surroundings. President Chew's man came out after today's meeting, his relaxed manner giving no indication that his master's fate hangs in the balance. The communists are believed to be demanding his removal from office as a precondition for any agreement. The Viet Cong delegate, Madam Bin, behaved as if there never had been any secret talks, although the Viet Cong's role in a future coalition government is believed to be another major source of argument. The chief communist delegate wasn't at today's talks. Presumably he was at a last-minute session with Dr. Kissinger. So while the future of the Vietnam War hangs on the outcome of Dr. Kissinger's talks, the charade of the official talks came to an end for another fortnight. The only scrap of information to be gleaned from today's official talks was that the tone of the communist speeches was markedly moderate, although their demands remain as extreme as ever. But throughout the entire proceedings here today, no mention at all was made of the secret talks between Dr. Kissinger and the North Vietnamese negotiators. And that perhaps shows, as clearly as anything, the total unreality of these proceedings here, which are now in their 4th year. Sandy Gore, News at 10, Paris.
The White House doesn't quarrel with the content of the disclosures from Hanoi, but they obviously took Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger very much by surprise. It was 11 hours before Mr. Kissinger called in reporters to make his long statement of the American position. In a sense, he takes agreement for granted, a signing within a matter of weeks, but he doesn't accept that there was ever agreement with Hanoi over a deadline of October the 31st. All that's necessary now, he says, is one more meeting with the North Vietnamese, and he then looks forward not simply to American disengagement, but to active participation in rebuilding a peaceful Indochina.
So this is the situation in which we find ourselves. With respect to Hanoi, we understand its disappointment that a schedule towards the realization of which it had made serious efforts could not be met for reasons beyond the control of any party. But they know, or they should know, and they certainly must know now, that peace is within reach in a matter of weeks, or less, dependent on when the meeting takes place. And that once peace is achieved, we will move from hostility to normalcy, and from normalcy to cooperation with the same seriousness with which we have conducted our previous less fortunate relationships with them.
The effect of a settlement is going to be as significant in America as it is in Vietnam. The war has split this country. It forced President Johnson out of office, and it's a central issue in this presidential campaign.
And we have been very conscious of the division and the anguish that the war has caused in this country. And one reason why the President has been so concerned with ending the war by negotiation and ending it in a manner that is consistent with our principles is because of the hope that the act of making peace could restore the unity that had sometimes been lost at certain periods during the war. And so that the agreement could be an act of healing rather than a source of new division. This remains our policy. We will not be stampeded into an agreement until its provisions are right. We will not be deflected from an agreement when its provisions are right. And with this attitude, and with some cooperation from the other side, we believe that we can restore both peace and unity to America very soon.
The question is going to be, if peace is possible now, why not 4 years ago? The answer, according to Kissinger, was the Hanoi concession only earlier this month to separate the military ceasefire from the political settlement. For Mr. Nixon's critics, the continuing war is a continuing broken promise. His promise to end it now could conceivably come true before the election. In any case, it can only be to his advantage. Leonard Parkin, News at 10, Washington.
One does not expect to see much evidence in Saigon that the country is nearer to peace than at any time since the long war began. A generation of fighting has made the Vietnamese pessimists. If there is an absence of excitement about the prospect of peace, there is much evidence that the government here is preparing for the event. All this week, thousands of hastily prepared posters have been pasted up on the city buildings. And for the first time in 4 years, since the last peace talks in fact, flags are being sold on the streets as part of the pro-Thieu, pro-loyalist, pro-war campaign. People are expected to display them prominently. Other banners up today endorse President Thieu's demand for a referendum on whether the people want any communist participation in a Saigon government. A referendum under the present law is of course nonsense. To endorse communism by word or by vote is punishable by death. Thieu's propaganda is no less effective than Hanoi's. So it's not surprising that when you stop people in the streets, their arguments tend to be identical. It's simply that if Hanoi really wants peace, it has only to turn around and walk out of South Vietnam. Back up its promise of a ceasefire, they say, by taking its 13 divisions out of the country. Hanoi, they say, is proposing peace terms very favorable to itself in a war that it's far from winning. Left to his own opinion and that of his military advisors, President Thieu can be expected to reject out of hand any new Hanoi proposal. But we know, of course, that any decision which directly involves Washington is not made on his own. If he continues blocking the peace proposals, President Thieu runs the risk of alienating Washington and President Nixon, who can argue in his own terms that he's ended the war and that from then on his responsibility ends. But President Thieu has warned Washington many times this week that a withdrawal of American support here could lead to a bloodshed. It could lead to a spate of intensive Viet Cong activity here in Saigon. It could lead to massive defection in the army, even an attempted coup. And this President Thieu knows the Americans cannot afford, however attractive Hanoi makes its proposals. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon. The South Vietnamese are now obsessed with flag raising. The 3 red stripes on the yellow background have been hoisted in their thousands this week, not only in Saigon, but in every village and every hamlet under Loyalist control. Earlier, the flag had simply been a symbol of support for President Thieu and his opposition to the ceasefire terms. But now, as more and more people think the ceasefire is inevitable, flags issued by the government now establish those areas under its control. But there are still plenty of areas still in doubt. We came across this roadblock on Highway 1, the road that leads to Cambodia. The communists had taken the villages of Up Chu and Up Doc, only 15 miles from the outskirts of Saigon, and it's the nearest they've managed to come so far in 4 years. In the past 36 hours, there were more than 148 communists attacked throughout the south, more than at any time since the massive Tet Offensive in 1968. There were also 81 shelling and rocket attacks. Most of the attacks have been around the Central Highlands, which is where President Thieu has had to send many of his better divisions. And this is why a handful of snipers dug into bunkers have effectively cut Highway 1 in half. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Highway 1, South Viet. Stalemate, are we back to square one?
Hỏi bằng tiếng Anh, nếu như ngày mai mà không ký kết được thì các bà làm gì, sẽ có những tiếp tục nói chuyện với cái sugar hay không, hay là chúng ta lại quay trở lại thời kỳ bế tắc như trước? Đó là tiếng Anh.
Ngắn hay dài mà vấn đề thiện chí hay là không?
Time is running out. We are already on October 30, and there are only 24 hours left before October 31st. But I think that the question is not whether we have time or not, but whether we have goodwill or not.
Do you think that there is the goodwill still on the part of the Americans to sign?
Mọi sự việc đều chứng tỏ rằng đến giờ thì ông Nixon là không có cái thiện chí đó.
Everything indicates that up to now, President Nixon has not that goodwill.
Is it possible that North Vietnam is prepared to make any further concessions towards the Americans?
We don't see how we can show our goodwill, how else, in another way. And we hope that President Nixon should not mistake our goodwill for any kind of weakness from our part.
There is another round of the peace talks here in Paris on Thursday. Will you be attending?
On last Thursday's session, we have agreed to continue the talks on next November 5th as usual. But now, how things will happen, you'll see how it will happen. You will see. You will see.
We will see. I had understood earlier that you had said that you would go on Thursday. I think we had gained the impression. You will go?
Yes, yes. But after that.
But after that?
You will see.
Yes, I see.
But we are not going to allow an election deadline or any other kind of deadline to force us into an agreement which would be only a temporary truce and not a lasting peace. We are going to sign the agreement when the agreement is right, not one day before. And when the agreement is right, we are going to sign without one day's delay.
Along all the important highways that lead to Saigon, impressively large concentrations of South Vietnamese troops maintain the positions they've held during this last week of sporadic communist attacks. But in the last few days, with the exception of the fighting in the Central Highlands 500 miles north of the capital, there has been less and less contact with the communist forces. More and more of the fighting centers around a village which the Viet Cong use as cover and attempt to cut the road. There might be only 1 or 2 snipers there, a Viet Cong suicide squad who know from the start they have no chance of surviving the South Vietnamese ground fire and bombing attacks. No village along any one of the main highways is entirely safe. Many no longer exist, except as ruins. So the drift of refugees away from the countryside to the towns continues. Often, if the journey is long, they'll set up their own camps, anywhere where there is shade for themselves and water for their cattle. Often farmers and their families will ignore the risk and return to their fields for food. They stay just a few hours in the paddy fields cutting rice and threshing it by the roadside. These excursions are brief but essential. They have no other source of food supply but this. There are no government camps they can go to, no government aid they can rely on. Information on the political maneuverings of Washington, Hanoi and Saigon will not have trickled to them this far, and the subtleties of President Thieu's opposition to the 9-point peace plan will have escaped them. For them, a ceasefire will only be a reality when they are no longer terrorized by the Viet Cong and when South Vietnamese shells and bombs stop ripping their homes apart. The near hysteria that has surrounded the ceasefire negotiations in Saigon over the past fortnight has ended. Attention once again has turned to the war. Everyone, of course, has one ear cocked for a further visit by Dr. Kissinger, or further concessions from Hanoi, or even the slightest change of attitude by President Thieu. Everyone, of course, is waiting for the ceasefire, but the longer they wait, the less optimistic they are. Michael Nicholson, News. Because of the character of this war, because there is no front line, because villages change hands so quickly, many flying the South Vietnamese flag during the day and feeding the Viet Cong at night, that the final decision on who controls what will probably be decided on what is generally called here the leopard spot policy. Under the leopard spot policy, it's decided that at the hour when the fighting has stopped, what is held by the communists will be administered by them, and the areas flying the South Vietnamese flag will be controlled from Saigon. What might look impressive on the map is deceiving. So is the total count of villages held by the communists, because they usually take over only the empty shell. Villagers suddenly become refugees and move out as the communists move in. Not necessarily out of political conviction, but for their own safety. After the bombing and shelling, there is usually very little left to inherit. More often than not, only the name of the village is left. This is what much of post-war South Vietnam will look like. Although some families have begun to move back to the ruins to try and rebuild in between the craters, most of the refugees will never return. These scenes, repeated all over the country, means that the population of South Vietnam is more and more concentrated in the district towns and the cities like Hue, Da Nang and Saigon. In the villages, there is the fear that the Viet Cong will kill those who have actively helped the government forces. It's happened frequently before, especially to the local militia. These volunteer home guards would be high on any Viet Cong list for assassination. There is the same fear in Saigon. Early in the war, the Viet Cong very successfully terrorized the city, and many people are convinced that given an amnesty under the ceasefire, the terrorists would work their way in again. So the fear is not that the communists will win on the battlefields of South Vietnam. People here are afraid that under the present ceasefire terms, the communists, as they see it, will be allowed back onto the streets. And nobody here can be certain, and that must include President Thieu, of any future political independence once the communists are allowed back in. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon, South Vietnam.
In 12 years of war in Vietnam, over 50,000 American soldiers have been killed, over 300,000 injured. So there's obvious relief in the towns and cities and streets of America, streets like this one in Norfolk, Virginia, that the killing may soon come to an end. But the moves towards peace are bringing anything but relief for a small group of families. The families of the prisoners of war. Families like the Mulligans, who live in this house here. The Pentagon has already released details of how it's going to get the prisoners home, an exercise they call egress recap. The latest figures show that 429 men are being held in North Vietnam, with another 114 held in the south and in Laos. One of these men is Captain James A. Mulligan, who joined the Navy in 1944 and was captured on March the 20th, 1966. In 7 years, his wife Louise has received 2 photographs of him, 4 Christmas cards, and 36 letters. She feels she's very lucky. Many families have had much less. Mrs. Mulligan has also just received from the Pentagon an egress recap book, explaining that within 60 days of the signing of a peace agreement, her husband will be transferred first to a reception center in the Pacific, probably Guam, Okinawa, or the Philippines. Mrs. Mulligan, when you actually see that book, you'll see all the detailed plans for bringing the men home. It looks as though it's really now going to happen. Does it make you very happy and excited?
I'm very happy, but I really am not that excited. You know, we've controlled our emotions for many, many years, and we've had to really kind of withdraw emotionally. Plus the fact that, you know, there have been many times in the last 7 years, at least 4 or 5 that I can remember, where our hopes have really been raised very high. And every time something doesn't come of these, you know, hopeful signs, it gets a little bit more difficult, you know, to bring yourself back up. So I think we've all kind of tempered ourselves, and we're taking a very let's wait and see attitude. I am very disappointed, though, to tell you the truth, that this came out as quickly as it did. And of course it was the North Vietnamese who released the fact and the details of the peace proposals. It has just made it doubly difficult for the families of these men, because had we not been told, you know, that things were really kind of coming to a head, we wouldn't be quite so anxious. And it's kind of just another little bit of cruel thing that I feel has been an undercurrent through this whole thing, really.
Mrs. Mulligan admits she's a little cynical. The strain of coping with 6 boys aged from 10 to 22, the constant worry about what's happening to her husband, all this, she says, has hardened her. Things will obviously change once Louise and Jim Mulligan are together again. The Pentagon booklet advises wives about the reunion by saying, relax, act natural, and be yourself. Mrs. Mulligan says she'll probably dissolve into tears. Jim Mulligan doesn't like tears, she says, but after 7 years he's going to have to put up with them. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Norfolk, Virginia. Martin Prest is one of the youngest old soldiers in America's history. He's also seriously wounded. So he represents a problem that's going to remain in America long after peace is signed. The problem of the young victims of Vietnam. Tell me, Marty, how did this happen?
Well, I was in an infantry platoon stationed on the DMZ in Vietnam, and I was in charge of demolitions, and I was disarming a booby trap, and it blew up.
That was when?
This was in January 1970.
And you've been in hospital roughly how long?
Well, I was in for approximately a year, then I was out for approximately a year and a half, and I'm back right now just for a short stay.
And you will never be able to walk again, obviously?
No, I won't.
You can't do really anything from waist down?
Approximately the waist down, right.
And
T12 level.
And how old are you?
I'm 25.
Would you try to go into the bed for me? How can you manage it the best?
America has a huge state-run organization for ex-servicemen and their families, the Veterans Association. This is a training room at a VA hospital in New York State, one of the 486 hospitals and clinics VA runs. Here, in a mock-up apartment, those who've been nursed back to health are taught how to cope with living outside the hospital. According to VA, the Vietnam War has not been as terrible as other wars, in terms of overall casualty rates, that is. Medical facilities have been better. Fewer wounded soldiers have died. VA estimates that 250,000 Americans who would have died in any previous war survived Vietnam. But that also means that many more soldiers have survived with serious disabilities. This time, for example, there are many more quadriplegics, people, that is, paralyzed not just from the waist down, but from the neck down. As peace gets nearer, America is beginning to assess what the war has done to her. Martin Prast can't forget what it's done to him.
I suppose it's the question that everybody in your position gets asked, but do you feel resentful about the war and about the country that did this to you?
Oh, not really. There's probably two main reasons involved. One of them is I've seen so many individuals that were hurt via car accidents rather than war and be in the same situation. And the other reason is that this type of injury that I had, I should have died, so I feel rather thankful to be alive in this situation than in a pine box.
What do you mean you should have died? You were so seriously hurt that...
Yeah, I had 4 holes through my heart, and I should have bled to death.
The soldiers America sent to Vietnam were, on average, the youngest she's ever sent to war. At 25, Martin Prast, the ex-Green Beret, faces 40, 50, maybe even 60 years in a wheelchair. He's going to need help for the rest of his life, and so are thousands like him. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Castle Point Hospital near New York. Just across the street from the White House, there's a Christmas spectacle, the Pageant of Peace. It's a symbol of the question many Americans are asking this Christmas: is the White House doing the right thing? Can more bombing bring peace to Vietnam?
Pure genocide, pure and clear genocide. That money could be put right into these cities right here, in these black communities in particular, and help educate some of these people and give them some better avenues for earning a living.
Well, I think he doesn't have any other alternative, for the simple fact that I'd like to see our POWs come back, and it seems like that's the only way we're going to get them back, is to show force.
Yeah, well, I think it's Nixon turned his back on the public after the election. I think it's wrong.
You didn't think he was telling the truth?
No.
What happened?
No.
I think it's very much in accord with Nixon's past insane actions. I think we can expect more of the same. And I think that he should be willing at this point to admit that he has made a mistake, to completely withdraw, and to accept any terms that the other side is willing to offer us, because we are obviously and have definitely been all along very much in the wrong.
I think it's a lousy Christmas present to the people over there, but I think the president has to conduct the negotiations the way he sees fit. There isn't really much we can do about it, I guess.
Among all the tinsel and the glitter and the pre-recorded music of this Christmas in Washington, this perhaps is one of the most moving things that I've seen. It's a little note pinned on one of these Christmas trees, and it says simply, "Cannot sleep in peace while we bomb and bomb, only to raise the number of prisoners of wars and missing in actions." Michael Brunson, News at 10, Washington.